Good evening, everybody. This is the Finfish Advisory Committee. I'm the chair, Tom Roller, and I want to call this meeting to order. Just a few things to start off with. We're going to do, when it comes to public comment this evening, we're going to do 3 minutes. In addition, I do want to set a few ground rules. The past couple of meetings, we've had full agendas, and those full agendas have taken us late into the evening, so it is my job tonight to keep you guys on schedule. I would like to get out here. We have a lot of staff members listening, a lot of people. Let's not keep everybody up too late. I'm still a little bitter about the last one. I wasn't feeling too good that last meeting. In addition to that, I'm going to ask you guys to stay on task during the presentation. If you have questions, keep them to questions. If you go on to provide some commentary, I will cut you off. When it comes to the decision document, we're going to go down the document. Let's keep our motions on task and on to the specific items at hand. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve Poland.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Roller. Good evening, everyone. I'm sitting in for Laura Klebansky. She's our MFC liaison, but she's been pulled off on another task this evening, so I'm filling in. I'm Steve Poland. I'm chief of the fishery management section at the Division of Marine Fisheries. We just wanted to start the meeting out with thanking everyone for attending. This is a hybrid meeting, so we're doing in person here as well as listening stations in Manteo and Wilmington. So when we get to the public comment, we will have public speaking from those locations as well as those who attended tonight here at the CDO. There are also chairman or AC members on the call tonight, so they will also be participating. So we just ask for a little patience as we try to navigate in person and the virtual world. All the votes tonight will be roll call votes, and we will do that on the screen. The screen will be changing from time to time between presentations and amendment documents and that. So again, just please, we just request a little bit of patience as we try to navigate this in-person and virtual world. So with that, Chairman Roller, I'll turn it back over to you for a roll call for quorum and then to proceed with the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Poland. I would like to start off with a roll call to achieve the quorum. So,
all right. Thomas Brewer.
Present.
Present. Jeff Buckle.
Present.
Brent Fulcher.
Present.
Randy Proctor. All right. Sam Romano.
Here.
Thank you. Ken Siegler.
Here.
William Tarpley. Scott Whitley.
Present.
Tom Roller.
Here.
David Mincy.
Here.
Alan Powell.
Here.
And James Rochelle. That was air. Yeah. All right. So everyone's present, Chairman.
So we have a quorum and we can conduct business. Let me pull up my agenda here. So our first order is an approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion? Thank you. Motion by Randy Proctor to approve the agenda. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Brent Fulcher.
You can do it by ascension if you'd like.
Okay, let's do this by consensus. Are there any objections to this motion? Hearing none, motion passes by consensus. Thank you. Next order of business is vote on the approval of the minutes from January 11th, 2022. On that motion, if anybody has any corrections, please do so now. Otherwise, I will accept a motion for approval of the minutes. Thank you. Motion by Randy Proctor to approve the minutes. Do I have a second for that motion?
Second, Ken Siegler.
Thank you, Ken. Second by Ken Sigler. Is there any objection to this motion? Hearing none, the motion passes by consensus. Thank you. So going forward, are we good? Okay. Going. Okay, let's get, we're moving a little fast here. I talk fast, I know. Okay, thank you, Corinne. At that moment, I guess we're going to move into the presentation. And again, note to the advisors here, if you have questions, keep it to questions. If you do commentary, I ask you to hold that to our debate time under the scheduled time. Thank you.
Good afternoon, AC members. Tonight we will be presenting you the management contained in Draft Amendment 2 to the North Carolina Estuarine Striped Bass Fishery Management Plan. For those of you who may not know who we are, I am Nathaniel Hancock, and with me tonight are Charlton Godwin, Todd Mathis, and Joe Facinvola. We are biologists for the division and co-leads for the Striped Bass FMP. Also joining us is staff from the Wildlife Resources Commission, since Amendment 2 was jointly developed by the Division of Marine Fisheries, DMF, and Wildlife Resources Commission, WRC, staff. I also want to point out that this presentation will follow along with the decision document in your packet that was sent to you a couple weeks ago. The goal of Amendment 2 is to manage for sustainable harvest. However, if factors out of our control prevent this, alternate strategies will be implemented to provide protection for and access to the resource. The objectives to achieve this goal are maintaining and restoring spawning stock, habitat restoration and enhancement, monitoring and promoting stewardship of the resource. The Northern Management Unit, circled here, includes the Albemarle Sound Management Area, also known as the ASMA in light gray, which includes the Albemarle, Croatan, Roanoke, and Currituck Sounds and all its tributaries, and the Roanoke River Management Area, also known as the RRMA in black, which includes the Roanoke River from the mouth up to the dam in Gaston. The striped bass stock in this area is known as the Albemarle Roanoke, or AR stock, and spawning takes place in the Roanoke River near Weldon. This stock is also managed under the Atlantic States Marine Fishery Commission because of the migratory nature of the AR striped bass stock. The most recent AR striped bass stock assessment was completed and approved for management use in 2020. The assessment indicated that the resource is overfished and is experiencing overfishing. The North Carolina Fisheries Reform Act and Amendment 6 to the ASMFC Interstate FMP for Atlantic striped bass require management measures to be implemented to end overfishing in 1 year and end the overfish status in 10 years. The Southern Management Unit is the Central Southern Management Area, also known as the CSMA, which is in dark gray on the map and includes all waters south of the ASMA. The CSMA has 3 stocks: the Tar Pamlico, Moose, and Cape Fear River stocks. Fish in the Tar Pamlico and Moose Rivers mix, but they do not tend to go down to the Cape Fear River, nor do Cape Fear River striped bass tend to move north. Because the CSMA striped bass stocks are not migratory, meaning they remain as a resident in the estuary, these stocks are not included under ASMFC management. The CSMA Estuarine Striped Bass Stocks Report, completed in 2020, is a collection of all data, all management effort, and all major analyses that have been completed for CSMA stocks to serve as an aid in development of Amendment 2. While this report does not yield a stock status, it does indicate the sustainability of Tar Pamlico and Neuse River stocks is unlikely at any level of fishing mortality. It also indicates that natural recruitment is the primary limiting factor. The report concludes that without stocking, abundance will decline. In the Cape Fear River, abundance declined even with no possession measures in place. These no possession measures were implemented in the Cape Fear River in 2008 and the Tar Pamlico and Neuse Rivers in 2019. The overall goal of the no possession measures is to increase the age structure and abundance of fish in these systems to move towards sustainable stocks. Draft Amendment 2 contains 3 sustainable harvest issue papers. 1 issue paper that deals with the potential to use hook and line in the striped bass commercial fishery, and 1 information paper about the history of striped bass stocking in North Carolina. Amendment 2 addresses the management strategies for the AR stock and the CSMA stocks separately. Appendix 2 focuses on the AR stock, Appendices 3 and 4 are focused on the CSMA stocks. Appendix 5 addresses a gear-specific issue. I would like to note that recommendations are initial and may change based on public and advisory committee input. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Charlton Godwin to run you through the AR issue paper.
Okay, thank you, Nathaniel. So now we're moving into Appendix 2, which is the issue paper that contains the sustainable harvest management strategies for the AR stock in the Albemarle Sound and Roanoke River management areas. The first issue we will discuss is the option to operate under a harvest moratorium or to continue with the current TAL, that's total allowable landings. Division and WRC staff's initial recommendation is to continue the use of a TAL to manage harvest. The rationale for the recommendation begins with past experience. A limited TAL was effective in the 1990s in improving the stock. Additionally, harvesting under a TAL ends the overfished status in 2020 within the 10-year requirement. A moratorium would end the overfished status in 2024. So that's indicated where the lines on the figure go above the solid black line in 2026. Each of the colors shows a level of recruitment that was used in the stock projections, with the gray line being a low recruitment scenario, which is what the stock has been in. As you see, with low recruitment, the number of mature females barely stays above the target. It should also be noted, if we don't get good spawning events soon, future stock assessments update could indicate a moratorium is indeed necessary. So now moving to option 2, which is to consider continuing to manage the ASMA commercial fishery as a bycatch fishery. Divisions and the WRC staff's initial recommendation is to maintain that bycatch fishery provision. The bycatch provision was implemented as a management tool in 1995. The bycatch provision requires the weight of striped bass not exceed 50% of the total landings of a commercial trip. Keeping or eliminating the bycatch provision has no real impact on sustainable harvest because the fishery closes when the TAL is expected to be reached. The bycatch requirement does discourage additional participants to enter the striped bass fishery or to enter the fishery to just target striped bass and not participate in the other multi-species gillnet fisheries. If hook and line, however, is used as a commercial gear, the bycatch requirement would not be used for that gear. So here we have the options for the next issue, which is accountability measures to address what happens when the TAL is exceeded. Basically, we have the first two options, which compares the total landings from all of the fisheries to the TAL to determine if a payback is necessary. The first two options are also associated with a 10% and a 5% buffer above the TAL, respectively. Option C compares the landings from each individual fishery to that fishery's specific TAL to determine if a payback is necessary, and also includes a 5% buffer. Option D is just like option C, except without any buffer around the TAL. The DMF recommends a pound for pound overage paybacks due to the status of the stock and the need to be conservative. The Wildlife Resources Commission staff would prefer a 5% buffer over the TAL to account for uncertainty in the recreational landings estimates. So the division's recommendation is a conservative approach of pound for pound payback due to the current overfished and overfishing status, while the Wildlife Resources Commission preference is currently not an option under the accountability strategy to address overages. WRC payback would be the portion above the buffer, not above the total TAL. The reasoning, again, is to account for uncertainty in the estimates, in the catch estimates. So moving on to the fourth issue, size limits to expand the age structure of the stock. So option A is status quo, to maintain the 18-inch minimum size limit in the Albemarle Sound management area, to maintain the 18 to 22-inch harvest slot in the Roanoke River management area, one fish greater than 27 inches allowed. Option B is to increase minimum size limits. Option C is to, in the Albemarle Sound management area, implement an 18 to 25-inch harvest slot. In the Roanoke, option D is in the Roanoke River management area, maintain the 18 to 22-inch harvest slot with one fish greater than 40 inches as a trophy fishery. And then option E, in the Roanoke River management area, maintain the current harvest slot limit of 18 to 20 inches and no fish greater than 22 inches. And the division and WRC staff's initial recommendations are for options 4C and 4E. The recommendations for option 4 are based on wanting to protect mature females and increase the number of mature females in the stock. This is the case with implementing an ASMA slot limit and removing the fish above the slot limit in the RMA. At their last meeting, the Wildlife Resources Commission supported removing that larger fish to protect mature females and their spawning potential. So the next issue is gear modifications and area closures to reduce discard mortality. The first option, A, is status quo, continue commercial harvest of striped bass with gill nets and recreational harvest and catch and release fishing in the ASMA and RMA, included on the spawning grounds. Option B is do not allow harvest of striped bass with gill nets. Option C is do not allow harvest or catch and release fishing for striped bass on the spawning grounds. Option D, expand the single barbless hook requirement to the entire RMA during striped bass season. And option E is to implement a requirement to use non-offset barbless circle hooks when fishing with live or natural bait in the inland waters of the Roanoke River upstream of the Highway 258 bridge from May 1st through June the 30th. The divisions and the WRC staff's initial recommendations are for options 5A and 5E. So the rationale for this, removing gill nets as a gear to harvest striped bass would increase dead discards and negatively impact the shad and southern flounder gill net fisheries. Expanding the single barbless hook requirement in the Roanoke River to the entire river may impact fisheries targeting largemouth bass and other sport fish during that time. Instead, the Wildlife Resources Commission and enforcement officers will continue to educate anglers about best fishing practices to reduce discard mortality. Additionally, the non-offset barbless hook with live bait will reduce dead discards and increase consistency with ocean striped bass regulations. So this is the last issue for the AR stock, adaptive management. So what is adaptive management? It is a structured process of decision making. It provides flexibility to incorporate new data and information as it is available. It has been used since the early 1990s to open and close harvest seasons, open and close areas, change daily possession limits, all to keep the harvest below the tail. It's also used to make gear modifications as necessary to reduce discards, and also used more recently to close hotspots to reduce interactions with protected species. And it is also used to adjust the tail based on stock assessments and updates to the stock assessment to keep fishing mortality below the fishing mortality target. The division and WRC staff initial recommendation are to support all the adaptive management measures. Adaptive management allows management to be adjusted to respond to data between full FMP reviews and has been an integral part of the striped bass FMP since 1993. It's used to keep harvest below the tail, reduce dead discards, and reduce interactions with protected species. It should be noted that the Wildlife Resources Commission has limited proclamation authority compared to the division. So now I will turn it over to Todd Mathis to present the issues for the tar pamlico and Neuse River stocks.
Thank you, Charlton. Now we're going to be moving into the CSMA, which is in the Southern Management Unit, includes all the water south of the ASMA. The CSMA has three stocks, the tar pamlico, Neuse, and Cape Fear River stocks. I'm going to be covering the tar pamlico and Neuse River Sustainable Harvest issue paper, and then turn it over to Joe Pachendala to cover the Cape Fear River Sustainable Harvest issue paper, and he'll also be covering the hook and line as a commercial gear issue paper. So option one is to continue or end the no possession measure. The division and the Wildlife Resource Commission recommend option 1A to continue the no possession measure. Modeling indicates sustainability is unlikely at any level of fishing and is primarily limited by poor natural recruitment. Continuing the commercial and recreational harvest closure provides the best opportunity to evaluate the population response in the absence of fishing mortality. If there are no other significant sources of mortality, such as natural mortality or discard mortality, or other losses to the population, such as fish leaving the system, no harvest should allow for the expansion of the age structure to include fish greater than age 10 to promote natural recruitment. If the no possession management is not maintained, alternative management strategies to promote sustainable harvest must be considered. Management strategies could include managing the fishery with the regulations that were in place prior to the no possession measure. Option two is maintaining the gill net closure above the ferry lines. In 2019, the Marine Fisheries Commission directed the Division of Marine Fisheries Director to close waters upstream of the ferry lines to the use of gill nets. In order to maintain this, the management must be selected in Amendment 2. If harvest is allowed in the rivers, the gill net closure above the ferry lines should be reevaluated. The reason for the single option is at the February 2022 Marine Fishery Commission business meeting, the Commission passed a motion to remove options 2B and 2C from Appendix 3. These were options to allow gill netting above the ferry lines. The rationale for limited gill netting was based on research that showed minimal interactions with striped bass in gill nets greater than 200 yards from shore. Adaptive management allows management to be adjusted to respond to data between full FMP reviews. The Division and Wildlife Resource Commission support option 3. It gives managers the flexibility to pivot and change management strategies when new information or data becomes available. Fishery independent surveys will continue to be used to monitor striped bass stocks in the Tarpamlico and Neuse River systems. In 2017, the division initiated a seine and trawl survey to capture young of year striped bass in the rivers. Also, the division's gill net surveys and the Wildlife Resource Commission spawning ground survey will be used to monitor the stocks. Adaptive management, as laid out in Amendment 2, schedules a review of fishery independent data through 2024 and 2025 and allows for adjustment of management measures and consideration of additional strategies. So now I'm going to turn it over to Joe to present the issues for the Cape Fear River stock and the hook and line as a commercial gear.
Thanks, Todd. So Appendix 4 is the Cape Fear River Sustainable Harvest issue paper, and this issue paper considers a potential change in the management approach. Option 1 in this paper is to maintain the no possession provision. This no possession provision was implemented in 2008 in order to increase the age structure and abundance of Cape Fear River striped bass. Maintaining this no possession provision would continue to limit fishing mortality in the system on striped bass and protect the fish that we know to be successfully spawning through genetic work and young of the year surveys. NCDMF recommends option 1 to maintain the no possession provision. The rationale for this would give us time to evaluate the passage structure, which was recently modified, which was completed in November of 2021 at Lock and Dam 1, as well as any passage that's occurring during the experimental flow pulses that were first implemented last year. This would also give us time to further assess wild spawning that we've documented in the system through the genetic work and young of the year surveys. And DMF believes that allowing any harvest during the spawning season may impact these fish that are making successful spawning runs. Option 2 is to allow seasonal harvest in the Cape Fear River. This is the option that the Wildlife Resources Commission recommends. The rationale for this is this would allow harvest of a primarily hatchery supported stock. The population continues to be primarily hatchery fish after 13 years of no harvest. And the Wildlife Resources Commission believes that access to spawning grounds is unlikely to improve before the next plan review. Options 3 and 4 are additional measures to allow fishing in the Cape Fear River in different boundaries. Option 3 is above the 140 bridge, and option 4 is harvest only in inland fishing waters on the main stem of the Cape Fear River, as well as adaptive management is option 5. And adaptive management will allow us to use evidence of any natural reproduction to modify management as needed. Both DMF and WRC support the adaptive management. And this will let us to use both the young of the year surveys and genetic work to kind of assess any spawning that's occurring in the system. Appendix 5 is the hook and line as a commercial gear issue paper. In Amendment 1 to the striped bass FMP, rules were changed to allow hook and line to be used as a commercial gear in the future as an adaptive management tool if regulations to the use of gill nets required an additional harvest gear for the catch of striped bass. This issue considers management considerations with implementing hook and line as a commercial gear and whether or not is an appropriate time at this time to do so. The options for this paper are to allow hook and line as a commercial gear at this time, or to do not allow hook and line as a commercial gear at this time, as well as an adaptive management framework. DMF does not recommend to allow hook and line as a commercial gear for striped bass at this time. And this is due to the current overfishing stock status and the very low towel in the only management area that's open to the commercial harvest of striped bass. However, we do recommend adopting adaptive management to keep hook and line as a tool option if in the future the stock status improves or any regulations further reduce the use of gill nets and hook and line is needed. And with that, we'll be happy to answer any questions. Our contact information is here on the screen if you wish to reach out to any of the leads during the next steps of the FMP process. Thank you.
Thank you all for the presentation. I'm going to open it up till we have some questions. I see Mr. Sigler has his hand up. However, I would like to ask a question first, if that's okay. Let's go to Appendix 2, Option 4. When you say size limits to expand age structure, is that commercial and recreational?
Yes, they would be. So we would be implementing in the ASMA would be for the commercial and recreational sector, that same 18 to 25 inch slot. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay, Mr. Sigler?
Yes, I was wondering, did I understand you to say that there is spawning occurring in the Wilmington area, but there's not up in the Tarpamacco?
So for the Cape Fear River, the last, I think the 2018 and 2019 genetic analysis that was done in 2018, I think it showed an overall, there was 11% wild fish detected in that. In 2019, I think it was 10% wild fish. Plus, in the last few years, we have been finding young of the year striped bass that have been spawned in the system. And I'll let Todd speak to the Tarpam news.
Thank you. This is Todd. Yeah, the Tarpam news, there's really limited natural reproduction. Again, kind of what Joe said, we're looking at the parentage-based testing, which is a genetic testing. You see a real high percentage of hatchery-reared fish. One thing that we did initiate, and in the presentation, I said that we started a seine survey and a trawl survey in 2017. We kind of had blanks the first years, but in 2021, we actually caught 2 young of year fish in our seine survey. We do not know whether they're wild or hatchery reared. That analysis will, it's at South Carolina Department of Natural Resources to be analyzed. We do know that the Wildlife Resource Commission through the Stocking Cooperative did stock fry in 2021 in Falkland, North Carolina. So, we may have some limited evidence of recruitment in the Tarpamacco, but we'll see how that goes. We've got same survey that'll start in June again, and we'll see if we start catching any more fish.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions before we move on into public comment? Go ahead, Mr. Buckle. Dr. Buckle, thank you.
Yeah, this is a question for Joe, just to follow up on the recruitment in the Cape Fear River. If I recall, the reason that WRC wanted to open the fishery was that it was just a stock. They assumed that it was just stocking fish only. But if you have evidence that there's young in the year production, and that assumption's wrong, am I following that correctly?
I think I'll let WRC clarify, I guess, afterwards. But I think we have the genetic evidence that there are some wild fish in that parentage-based tagging that's been done. Plus, the young of the year that we collected, we had those tested as well, and they were not hatchery. So there is some limited reproduction happening in the system.
Thanks, Joe.
Mr. Fulcher?
I don't know if this question is for Charlton or just who, so if whoever wants to field it, feel free. But discard mortality in this fishery, recreational, and I know different times of year is different versus commercial. What's the base? I mean, what do y'all figure as an average? I know and the reason I ask that is because as it appears that everyone wants to say the central fishery, the Tar Pamlico region, Neuse River, tends to be interpreted as a put-take type fishery. So I'm just curious, with us looking at increase in size limit a little bit, what I was seeing there, if I'm not mistaken, would we be smarter to think about maybe decreasing it, and if so, or why not, to reduce the discard mortality if you're allowing some harvest?
Yeah, so good question. So it's really complicated with striped bass, because we have the different management areas. In the Albemarle Sound management area, you have one. That's where we're thinking about changing potentially size limits. What we're proposing is to implement a slot limit in the Albemarle Sound, not increasing the minimum. Discard mortality estimates, they vary from both of those systems. Tarpam, Neuse is different. So all of the estimates of the various commercial, recreational dead discards are in the FMP. I can't tell you what every one of them are right now off the top of my head.
Tarpam, the Neuse is on 92.
Yeah, you can just.
Yeah, so the top average. Yeah, so there's in table 3.1 for the Tarpam and Neuse, specifically, there's a table for the recreational dead discards and commercial dead discards. And the total, since 2012 to 20 was 30,000 dead discards in the recreational fishery and 12,000 in the commercial fishery.
And I will say, the discards and just releases and stuff in the Albemarle Sound management area for the recreational side are higher, and the commercial discards are a bit higher too. But so just for clarification, we're not really suggesting that was one of the options in using the size limits to expand the age structure. But what we really want to do is, think about red drum. Striped bass can live to 30, 35 years old too. So if they've already got the slot limit in the Roanoke River, have had it for years, implementing the slot limit in the ASMA would additionally protect all of those females over 25 inches when they, just start spawning. So I hope that answers your question.
Mr. Tar, follow up? Okay.
So, still never got really a number, but just taking that in consideration, when we're above the line where WRC manages and you have that fishery and those fish are in the spawning point in their life.
Sorry, they can't hear you online.
Those fish are in the spawning part of their life, and that fishery is a recreational catch and release fishery. What kind of discard mortality it's seeing then, and how is that harming the stock?
So the discard mortality estimate that we use is kind of an average of several studies, or a study at several different water temperatures. It's 6.5%. All of the discards in the Albemarle Sound management area, whether they come from the recreational sector or the commercial sector, or we have estimates of those, and they are used in the stock assessment, and they go as they count towards fish that are killed and removed, and count towards the fishing mortality. So as far as fishing on the spawning grounds, they've been fishing on the spawning grounds in the Roanoke River, forever. And in the 90s, they recovered. The Wildlife Commission, their season ends, their harvest season ends April 30th. So the point of that is to kind of shift harvest towards the males, and once the majority of the females get up there, harvest is closed, although they do have catch and release fishing. However, we do have WRC staff on here if they want to add anything to that. But so that's they have been fishing up there for a long time. So, but again, those discard, I can find those discards estimates in here. Sometimes they range from 10 or 15,000 fish to 20 or 30 or 40, 50,000 fish a year, just depending on year class strength and stuff. And that's from all sectors. But it's in the FMP. I'll get to it.
I have a Christopher Smith. I believe he's with WRC with his hand up. If you'd like to comment or follow up on that.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. What Charlton said was right on. Right on. I just wanted to kind of reiterate that the dead discards are included into the stock assessment. You know, it's not like they're happening and we completely ignore them or we completely forget them. They're taken into account in the stock assessment too. So yeah, I just wanted to make that clear or reiterate that point.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. A quick follow-up on that. Regarding the catch and release mortality in the commercial fishery, what's that estimate based on? Is that the observer program?
So you're asking the amount of discards that we see in the commercial fishery?
Yeah, what's your information based on?
Currently, it's based on the observer program. Prior to the observer program, when we had a lot of observer coverage in the Albemarle Sound area due to Atlantic sturgeon, we used other methods to estimate it, but basically we just had to kind of use catch rates from our own independent gillnet survey and compare it. But right now, it's based on observer trips. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I think a lot of us have a lot of questions of whether that's not a representative sample of the fishery. You know, while we're on this, do you have the plan document that you could put up on the screen? Or no? That's too much. I was just curious if you could bring up the age length distributions of catches. I think it's on page 68, 69. I'm probably seeing that. Yes, Mr. Tarpley, would you like to go?
Yeah. By having two different slot limits for the Roanoke River and the Albemarle Sound, we're 18 to 22 and 18 to 25. In the 18 to 22, there's going to be assume that we're going to have some significant dead discards for those fish between 22 and 25 that are caught and released. Why not go ahead and harvest them? And we've got the complication of having two different limits for the fishermen to understand from and provide some confusion compared to the benefit of that. Does that make any sense?
It does, yeah. And I mean, if I don't answer you like you were thinking, just let me know. But you know, so we've had different regulations in the Roanoke River management area and the Albemarle Sound management area for since 1990, even prior to that. So we've had different size limit regulations in there forever. The Albemarle Sound management area has never had a slot, that upper slot. It's just 18-inch minimum. So scroll to so here's the length distribution for the Albemarle Sound management area harvest. You can see the majority of the fish that are caught are under 25 inches anyway in the recreational fishery, so it's not really going to create a lot of excess discards in that particular fishery. We're also not going to get a lot of savings there just because they don't catch a lot of fish above 25 inches. So the Roanoke River management area is next, and you can see that slot limit, 22 inches. You know, they do measure a few fish from time to time, 23 inches, but for the most part, it's 18 to 24, and they don't catch a whole lot over that 27 anyway. So the next one is going to be the Albemarle Sound management area commercial fishery. And you can see they do harvest, harvest only maybe 8, 9, 10% of the entire harvest, depending on what year it is above 25 inches. You know, when we look at the mesh size, the selectivity of the gillnet meshes that are used in the shad fishery, which is predominantly where they come from, 90%, 95% of the harvest is less than 25 inches. 90, like I said, depending on what year. So we expect that the 18 to 25, it's not going to create a lot of extra excessive discards. Going to a 22-inch slot in the Airmont sign management area, if those gillnet fisheries were still to allow, that would create a lot of. So that's kind of why we picked that 18 to 25 in the Airmont sign management area at the fisheries management plan. During those advisory committee workshops, the commercial representatives, they were supportive of this as well. And, we just over time, again, same thing as the red drum, for fish that really live a long time. And they really, I don't know if you can find that length frequency of the egg thing. No, it's just going to increase the number of the 7, 8, 9+ year old fish in there. So here you can see up top, you've got millions of eggs spawned on the top graph up there. You can see once you get above 25 inches, while still, 200,000 or 300,000 eggs spawned per female, from most of them are mature by 19 inches. Pretty good. But once you get above 25 inches, you're talking anywhere from 1 million to 4 million eggs. So we just really want to see, we saw that age, those 9+ fish expand a lot in the mid-2000s based on all of that really strong recruitment we had. If you look on the FMP, it's got a graph of our juvenile abundance index. We had great recruitment, great spawning success from 1993 to about 2000. And we saw that, you saw it in the age structure there. We saw that expand, but since we've had some poor recruitment since 2001, really, a lot of it due to environmental concerns because the stock was at its highest abundance, we've seen that age structure of those 9+ fish really shrink. So that's why we really like that 18 to 25 inch slot just to protect all those fish. We have seen a fish 31 years of age in the stock recently, but that's just, it's only one. So, I mean,
Understand that for the Almarble. In the Roanoke.
So what's your suggestion?
Going from 22 to 25 in the Roanoke as well as Almarble.
Well, I mean,
so sorry. Again, I just don't think that they would see, even though they have that, and I guess, I don't know, I'll let maybe Chris speak to that, but that's kind of the fish that's the size fish they catch. The anglers are, I think they're happy with that. It does protect the fish that are 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. So, we just didn't really, that wasn't something that was requested or we looked at. But again, Chris Smith or Ben with the Wildlife Commission can comment on that in the Roanoke River.
It's my understanding that we got Chris's hand up. I'm going to call for him in a second, but it's always been managed to maintain harvest on the male fish, which stay up there for longer periods of time. Now, if you go back to the previous document on page 69 really quick, what I wanted to point out is for those of us who are really concerned about protecting these larger female fish, you're seeing a lot more large fish caught in the commercial fisheries, and that's pretty apparent in that data. Before I go to Mr. Sigler, does Mr. Smith have a comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Both you and Charlton were correct. We put a bunch of different regulations on the Roanoke River to, one, protect the spawning females. So our harvest is targeted to the males that do stay up there longer. The harvest lot limit would protect those 6 to 8 year old fish and allow those fish to grow into the 9+ ages. So while discards, are always a concern, I think giving that extra protection, especially on the spawning grounds, is needed in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm now going to call on Mr. Sigler, and then I'm going to do a last call for questions.
Yes, I was wondering, what would be the effect if you took in that man on the spawning ground there and moved that open season back 2 weeks as a further buffer against catching the female fish?
I don't know, Chris, would you like to take that?
Yeah.
Mr. Smith, go ahead.
Yep. I mean, it's a possibility. You know, usually our normal season runs from March 1st through April 30th. You know, that's based on some long-term data, but as y'all may know, it's hard to exactly make fish spawn during those days. So it's a possibility that you know, a slight shift may focus more on fish. It's something that we could definitely think about and contemplate, especially through this new FMP process. So
I think it'd be a good idea because it seems like the females are showing up at a certain time and a certain water temperature. If you could roll that back 2 weeks, both on the beginning of the season and the ending of the season.
Thank you, Ken. Ken, your question, please.
No, it's not a question. I'm a response.
Well, this is for questions. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Felcher.
So I think this is just a follow-up on Mr. Tarpley's. I think my understanding of his question was that to keep conflict in management for DMF or WRC, if it's a certain point in the waterway, if it was the same limit, it doesn't, to me, it didn't appear to be that many fish over the 22 to 25 range, and it would make management simpler. And also, there is some form of mortality, even though I ain't got that percentage yet from anybody. But my guess is, depending upon the time of year, it's probably 10 to 25%. It's a guess. It might not be any more damaging by taking that fish, especially if you're on some type of limit to begin with. And that was kind of my question, to see if I understood his question.
That was where I was.
That was great, and I hope you bring that back up in comment period. Thank you. Charlton?
So, yeah, Mr. Fulcher, I just wanted to, so the mortality rate that we estimate on discarded recreational hook and release fish in the Albemarle Sound management area and the Roanoke River management area, that percentage is 6.4% that we use, but it's an average, you know, as the water temperatures get warmer, you know, that discard mortality increases. As they're colder, it decreases. So it's going to be sometimes higher than that, sometimes lower than that. So we just kind of use that average throughout the whole year. As far as the number of estimated dead discards in the Albemarle Sound management area from the commercial fishery, it averages, you know, estimates of 6 to 7 or 8,000 fish maybe a year, down to a couple of thousand. You know, again, depending on year class strength. And again, in the front part of the document, the estimates of catch and release of fish from the Roanoke and Albemarle Sound area, it can be anywhere from 25, 30 to 100,000 fish a year. And then you can apply 6.4% to that and get those numbers. So that's kind of what those estimates of numbers are. And that's something that's also like in our FMP updates every year that we do for all of our species. That data is all in there.
Thank you, Charlton. I think we've got a good run of questions going here. We're a little bit behind schedule. So, Mr. Howell, this is going to be the last question, y'all.
Yeah, I was just curious. It seems that in terms of recruitment, river flow is pretty much a big factor in determining the year class strength. And I guess what I'm concerned about, or I have been thinking about, is what is the status of the activities that are going on to where we can control these flows. I know that optimal flows are 6,000 to 8,000 in the Roanoke River, if I'm not mistaken, but it's the higher flows that appear to have some sort of a poor impact on recruitment. Is there any activity going on now by any groups that are looking at ways to control this flow?
Yeah, I'll let our staff with WRC do that because they are the ones that are most heavily involved in that. But yes, they work with the Army Corps daily on that during the spawning season. But I'll let either Chris or Ben jump in on that if they want to.
Charlton, this is Ben. Can he repeat the question? The microphone I couldn't really quite hear what he was asking.
I'll repeat it for you, Ben. Mr. Powell wants to know, what do y'all do to try to control those flows in the spring to get them to keep them, in that guide curve where we optimal spawning for striped bass in the spring there.
Okay, good. I just didn't want to go down a rabbit hole and it not be the right one. Yes, we meet with the Corps on a conference call once a week, if not more often, depending on changes need to be. And we're always negotiating for the best flow possible, given the current situation with rainfall and things like that. So that's an ongoing thing that we're doing with the Corps on a pretty regular basis, based on what the fish are telling us and the water that's available out of car. So,
Thank you, Ben. So with that, I would move that we move on to the public comment session of the meeting.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So before we begin, just to remind everyone to keep your comments to 3 minutes. I will be timing and I will remind everyone when they have 30 seconds left. We have speakers registered to speak from Dare County and on the phone, as well as speakers here in attendance tonight. So we'll start in Dare County. And staff up there in Dare County, can you just speak to make sure that we can hear audio?
Yes, can you hear me, Steve?
Yes, I hear you. All right, so first up from Dare County, we have Commissioner Steve House.
Before I begin, I want to thank everyone for allowing public comments. This was a resolution that was passed unanimously by the Dare County Board of Commissioners. Whereas North Carolina Fisheries Reform Act of 1997 requires the state Division of Marine Fisheries prepare fishery management plans for adoption by the North Carolina Marine Fisheries Commission for all commercially and recreational significant species or fisheries that comprise the state marine estuary resources, with the goal of these plans to ensure long-term viability of the fisheries. And whereas North Carolina is the only state that allows fishing of the striped bass species during spawning season and on the spawning grounds during spawning seasons. Whereas the North Carolina DMF data shows catch and release mortality in the Roanoke River Management Area of 182,481 dead discards since 1997, while there have been only 53,880 in the Albemarle Sound Management Area since 1997. Whereas the ASMA is 667,674 acres with a 6-month season that is not during the spawning season. And the RRMA is 6,420 acres with a 1-3-week season that is during and on the spawning grounds. And whereas the RRMA catch and release March 1st through June 30th with an open harvest from April 24th through April 30th, and spawning season for the striped bass is in April and May. Whereas the ASMA 6-month season quota was reduced from 206,250 pounds in 2020 to only 38,418 pounds in 2021, a reduction of 81.376%, and finished the 2021 season at 4,546 pounds under quota, while the RRMA 1-week season went 14,742 pounds over quota. Therefore, be it resolved that the Dare County Board of Commissioners hereby endorses shifting a greater allocation of the striped bass quota to the ASMA in order to protect and preserve the striped bass stock, thus increasing the striped bass species chances of spawning and growing its stock. And thank you again, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. Next up, we have Reese Stecker.
My name is Reese Stecker. I run a charter boat and fish for striped bass full-time dating back to 1997. We're trying to get back to a 2 fish per day with our striped bass quota in the Albemarle Sound region. That could happen if the recreational quota is reallocated to an equitable split on the water area for the Albemarle Sound region, which is 667,674 acres with a 6-month season, not during and not on the spawning grounds, versus the Roanoke Rapids region, which is 6,420 acres, 104 times smaller, with a 4-day season during the spawn on the spawning grounds. And we're not talking about a fishing season catch and release. We're talking about a kill season. There is a kill season where you can kill 12,180 pounds. We, the ASMA, have had great fishing over the past half dozen years. We at the ASMA lost 81.376% of our quota. We at the ASMA came in under quota. We're coming in under quota. Why do we need a slot limit too? I'm scratching my head on that. Whereas RRMA has been rewarded with a 4-day kill season during the spawn on the spawning grounds after going 14,742 pounds over quota. And I'm also scratching my head. I know, Tom, you guys at the meeting last month on the Spanish mackerel quota where the netters went over, raised hell that they should be penalized. There's not a peep from anybody about penalizing Roanoke Rapids for going. They caught twice their quota last year. They caught more than twice their quota last year. Where are we at here? The number one killer of striped bass in North Carolina waters in regard to the 3 user groups are the Roanoke Rapids Management Area dead discards. This is table AR_table 1 from Charlton Godwin. I'm not none of these calculations are based before 97 because there's a big gap there. But since 1997, RRMA has had 182,481 dead discards. These are fish, not pounds. The netters have only had less, 133,235 pounds, whereas Albemarle Sound is at 53,880 pounds, 3 times less than Roanoke Rapids. And where's all the uproar over that? It's like it gets swept under the rug like it's not happening. I mean, it's just very frustrating for us over here when we're under quota. Our season got cut. We didn't even catch our quota. And this is going on over there, and everybody just acts like it's not happening. I mean, at some point, it's got to be addressed. If it's about the economy, we're worried about Roanoke Rapids' economy. There's 8 counties that border the ASMA. Dare County, Currituck County.
And that's, thank you, Mr. Stecker. Okay, next we'll move to Joey Van Dyke, and he's on the phone. You should be unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. My name's Captain Joey Van Dyke. I do live on the Outer Banks, but in the wintertime I do fish, or I used to fish the Noose, the Tar, the Roanoke, and the Albemarle Sound and stuff like that. I've watched over the time since the mid-90s of all our rivers getting closed to striper fishing. A lot of my charters want to catch and keep fish. And what has happened is everything has been pushed into the Roanoke River. And all the public views on the internet and everything else has focused more effort into the Roanoke River since they cannot harvest fish in their backyards in the Noose and on the Tar River, which has put exceedingly more pressure on the fisheries in the Albemarle Sound and on the Roanoke River. Now, we've seen this time after time with the commercial fishermen, and they keep getting choked down and funneled to certain spots to where they cannot make it no more. And it's getting to the same point now where everybody's starting to look at the Roanoke River and Albemarle Sound area as closing all that area off to us and costing us dearly for public access and for economical access just for the counties, that surround this whole area. And it's a shame. I want to, basically blame the Wildlife Resource Commission and North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries for letting this fall and flail like it has. The Tar River and the Neuse River have been closed for 5 years now with no recoup whatsoever of fish. And they're still undecided if they'll ever open it up again. Do we want this to happen to the Albemarle Sound and the Roanoke River? No, we do not. We don't want to lose our fisheries. People come from all over the country just to come and fish these rivers and enjoy our fish that we have. And you would think that the Wildlife Resource Commission, North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries would take pride in having one fishery in this whole state that they can actually control with the stockings that they do and allowing people access to that fish. But it is still flailing, so we have a big problem, and it needs to be reviewed, taken into consideration. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Van Dyke. So next we'll move to public commenters and attendance. Just give us a second to get the microphone set up. All right, first up we have Mr. Bill Gorham. All right, Mr. Bill Gorham decided he did not want to speak. So next we'll move to Glenn Skinner.
I'm Glenn Skinner, Executive Director of North Carolina Fisheries Association. Come here tonight to talk to you about the gillnet closure of the ferry lines in the Neuse, Pamlico, Tar Rivers. Explain a little bit about how that closure came into place. At the adoption of Supplement A, when they put the moratorium in these rivers, the MFC requested that DMF Director at the time, Steve Murphy, prohibit the use of gill nets above these lines. He declined to do so, said that the science didn't support it, sent a 6-page letter to the commission explaining why he didn't do it. At that time, the commission called an emergency meeting with only 48 hours notice and absolutely no public comment, and forced the director to close gill netting above these ferry lines in the Neuse and Pamlico rivers. It wasn't justified, and to prove that, Secretary Michael Regan from DEQ, for the first time I'm ever aware of, publicly condemned the Marine Fisheries Commission for those actions, sent out a public press release expressing his disappointment with what they had done. And we're here tonight to ask you all to make a recommendation that the Marine Fisheries Commission lift those gill net bans up those rivers and allow the fishermen to access fisheries other than striped bass, speckled trout, striped mullet, white shad, menhaden for crab bait, white perch, you know, the list goes on and on. There's a lot of fisheries that occur in that river, especially in the summertime when they're way up above those ferry lines, and the fishermen can only access those fish if they can get above that line. The Northern Advisory Committee and the Southern Advisory Committee both made recommendations that the MFC lift this net ban, and I hope that y'all will consider doing the same. And I think it's a shame that the MFC chose to pull these items off of the draft and not let the public comment on them or let y'all weigh in. And after all, you all are advisors to the MFC. The MFC is not your advisor. So I would strongly consider that you all make that same recommendation or at least discuss it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Skinner. Next, we have Stuart Creighton.
Evening, guys. I hope everybody's doing well tonight. Just a couple things off the top of my head real quick that I jotted down while I was here this evening. First of all, I'm really concerned about the Albemarle Roanoke stock. That is our last remaining native spawning stock. And whatever we do management-wise, we have got to get it right. We cannot lose that fishery. Period. We cannot lose that fishery. I was on the Striped Racing Committee. I know full well how important flow is to the reproduction of those striped bass. Guys, I'm telling you, there's more going on than just flow on the Albemarle. And we need to know what it is. I think there are too few big fish. And I question what exactly is the impact from blue cats?
how thoroughly has this fishery been studied? Has the division studied the blue cat fishery? Do we know what are in their stomach contents? Do we know whether or not trot lines, gill nets interact with striped bass as well? Is there a greater impact from gill nets than acknowledged? Are the warm weather dead discards greater than acknowledged? Is it my favorite answer to any test that I had while I was in school? E, all of the above. What is it? We've got to figure it out. We've got to figure it out fast. Something else on the Albemarle, when this fishery does recover, we cannot set catch limits as high as we have in the past. As soon as that stock recovered in the 90s, the catch limits went right back up to the maximum level. They got about 2 years on it, and then right back out it went. You can't do that. You've got to build in some kind of conservation measure for these bad spawns that we get, I hate to say regularly now. So please take that into consideration when you're considering choices for the Albemarle. On the noose and tarpam, I fish that area a lot, guys, and I'm going to tell you right now, those gill net restrictions are working. There are more and larger striped bass on the Noose River than I have seen in decades. The benefit to other fisheries is there.
30 seconds.
You need to keep that. And then real quickly on the future of the Cape Fear and also the Tarnoose, Pamlico, what are we going to do when and if this becomes a put, grow, take fishery? Have you guys considered what that management will look like? If you haven't, you should, because we may be there in 2 years on the Cape Fear. If the improvements to the fish ladder don't work, we may be there in about 5 years on the Noose if these spawning efforts don't get better. Have you thought about that? If not, you should.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. All right, and last we have Greg Judy.
Gregory Judy, I live in Washington. Good evening. I thank you for being actively involved as a member of the advisory committee. I will direct my comments to the management options for Tar Pamlico and Noose River. Last fall, October 2021, I served as a commercial representative on the Estuarine Striped Bass Management Plan workshop. Overall, I thought the process went well and there was a good exchange between the participants. Prior to the workshop, I had contacted commercial fishermen in both river systems to gauge their thoughts on the management of striped bass. Because of the current low populations and poor natural recruitment, the consensus of the fishermen was to reluctantly support the no possession measure for striped bass as the population rebuilds. What the fishermen requested was access to the use of gill nets above the ferry lines. I tried to inform the PDT that most of the effort would be with small mesh nets targeting striped mullet, speckled trout, and white perch. These would mostly be drop nets and would be attended. It seemed reasonable to also include the large mesh flounder fishery since the season will only be 2 to 3 weeks in duration, and due to the cooler water temperatures in October, releases from the incidental catch of stripers would have higher survival rates. In the Pamlico and Noose River system, data provided by DMF shows that for the years 2013 through 2018, average annual total dead striped bass from small mesh and large mesh gill nets was 708 fish. Almost 2/3 of this total was from large mesh nets. But remember, at that time, the flounder season was 11 months long, not 2 to 3 weeks. Also, these mortalities included stripers discarded during the open striped bass season when large mesh nets could be set very close to shore and didn't require tie downs. At the latest MFC meeting in February, the Commission eliminated the option for the use of nets above the ferry lines. By eliminating that option, these commissioners, aligned with the CCA and the NC Wildlife Federation, showed their true colors by trying to prevent review and debate by the public and the advisory committees. I'll give you an example in defense of the use of gill nets. In the Albemarle Sound Complex, the 2008 river herring moratorium has resulted in a steady decline in the use of small mesh gill nets.
30 seconds.
In 1999, there were approximately 9,500 small mesh trips. In 2018, there were approximately 1,600 small mesh nets. An 83% reduction in the number of small mesh gill net trips, but striped bass continue to decline in Albemarle Sound and Roanoke rivers. Please consider and recommend the limited use of gill nets above the ferry lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Judy. Chairman Roller, that concludes the people that signed up for public comment.
Thank you, and that ends our public comment session. So I assume we're going to move into the document now. And what I would like to do for the committee here is I'd like to keep us on task. I just want to go down by each option, and we're just going to start off with motions. So option 1, sustainable harvest. Do I have a motion? Do I have any sort of motion here? For all those listening, everyone's flipping through their pages. So. Mr. Fulcher.
I'd make the motion to choose option 1A as status quo, as that was the recommendation from the division, if I remember correctly.
That's right. It's the bolded motion. So do I have a second for that motion? Second.
Ken Siegler, I'll second.
We had a lot of seconds.
Mr. Tarpley, the first one.
I think it was Mr. Proctor was the first one because he's sitting right next to me. No offense to the other seconds.
Thank you.
Do we have any brief debate on this motion? I'm assuming we need to do roll call on all of these?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So unless I have any questions, I'm going to call for a roll call on this motion.
All right. Mr. Brewer? Mr. Brewer? All right. Thank you. Jeff Buckle?
Yes.
Mr. Fulcher?
Aye.
Mr. Proctor? Mr. Romano? Sam?
Yeah. Aye. Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you. Thank you. Mr. Siegler?
Aye.
Mr. Tarpley? Mr. Whitley?
Aye.
Mr. Roller?
Abstain.
Mr. Mincy?
Aye.
And Dr. Powell? I believe the motion passes. It is. Well, you all gave me this sheet. So.
That's past the buck right there. Though it would be helpful if we would go by that roll call on the screen. Folks.
Noted.
Thank you. Let's move on to option, excuse me. So motion passes. Yeah, there's some great St. Patrick Day's costume here. Y'all look great. So motion passes at 10-01, correct? So let's move on to option 2. Do I have any sort of motion, Mr. Fulcher?
I'll make the motion for option 2A, status quo, continued bycatch fisheries. It appeared that was the division's motion also.
Do I have a second? Second, Dr. Powell. He beat you to the punch, Ken. Do we have any debate or comments on this motion? I will only add that I only raised the question that we've seen the gillnet fishery, particularly the Albemarle Sound, does catch a lot of bigger fish. So my concern is we're going to have considerable dead discards there. Any comments? I'm not seeing any hands. So I'll move on to a roll call vote.
All right.
How about we do it by the screen this time?
I'll follow the list on the screen.
Thank you, Mr. Poland.
Mr. Brewer.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Buckle.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Fulcher.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Mincy.
Abstain.
Thank you. Dr. Powell. Thank you. Mr. Proctor. Thank you. Mr. Romano.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Siegler.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Tarpley. Thank you. Mr. Whitley.
Aye.
Thank you. Chairman Roller.
Abstain.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Okay, we're going to move on to Alamo Sound Management Options, item 3. I will entertain a motion on here, though I do point out, remember, WRC and DMF staff did not agree on this. So I'm looking for hands, or I'm looking for hands in the room. Hands online, I meant. Dr. Powell.
I make a motion that we accept.
Which would be the division's recommendations, just for the record.
Yes.
Do I have a second? Mr. Fulcher, second. Thank you. Do we have any debate on this motion? Go ahead, Mr. Fulcher.
I would like to hear what the Northern and Southern's motions on this issue were, just out of curiosity.
I'm a little hesitant. I don't like to use the previous motions just because I do want you all to make up your own minds. On this issue, the Northern accepted option 3D, correct? And same with the Southern Regional Advisory Committee. Do we have any other questions or debate? So I'm not seeing any hands, and if I'm missing any, just a note to staff just to point them out. I just want to point out for the record here while we're discussing this, as our seasons are getting considerably shorter, that, it puts recreational fisheries management with MREP in a tough position because that really increases our PSEs and makes it difficult to manage these things. Go ahead, Mr. Godwin.
So I just want to point out that, so we don't use MREP, for the striped bass, creel estimates. We have our own, because MREP doesn't really go far enough coastal in the rivers and stuff. So since the 88 in the Roanoke River, Wildlife Resources Commission has their survey and the division has its own creel surveys. So we can get estimates a little quicker than MREP estimates. Still, they're a week or two lag time, not 6-8 months. And the PSEs, because these creel surveys only focus on striped bass, and it's a longer season. It's not those short pulse fisheries like snapper grouper. Our PSEs are typically lower than 30, closer to 20. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out.
No, I understand that. And but an estimation-based survey, I think you would probably agree the shorter the season gets, the higher the margin of error, right? So it's really harder to capture, a 12,000 pound quota over a 4-day season. It's going to become more hard. Is that too?
I would agree with that. But also, I will also point out that even if our seasons in the Alamo Sound management area or the Roanoke River management area, like we haven't had to shorten our season yet, just because we haven't had catch rates, but they are still creeling in the Roanoke River for the entire period that they would have from March to. But yes, sir. In general, the fewer harvest days you may have, the chances of the PSEs going up. I just want to make sure that everybody knew we weren't using MRIP survey.
Yeah, I just kind of group it all. It was the wrong terminology on my part, but yeah, it's important to point out it's one of the best sampled fisheries probably in the East Coast. We really do a good job, WRC and DMF, on those fisheries. So, Mr. Fulcher.
Just as a point of discussion, I think that it would be pretty simple to manage this fishery with the take aspect of it, not the discard part of it, but the take aspect of it, just through tags, because you're already requiring that on the commercial side. Shouldn't be no reason it shouldn't be able to be adapted on the recreational side, and there won't be any doubt of what the harvest is or when it's attained for anyone.
Reporting is a big topic of discussion across all aspects of the recreational fishery, but we know here in North Carolina we can't do limited entry programs. So depending on how we issued that would be probably pretty problematic. Go ahead.
I don't think it would be limited entry. You're allowing harvester to fish with a tag. They purchase a license, and there should. I mean, we're doing it now with Atlantic bluefin when the recreational sector got cut out of that, and a commissioner from the coast made that suggestion, and we got it done. And I think it's an easy way to manage this fishery, and it's an easy way to take all the uncertainty out of the MREP program and move forward.
Yeah, point taken.
Would you like me to speak to that? Just for striped bass. So, yes, I think that back to bluefin stuff, I think they do, however, require some sort of limited entry. But as far as the commercial tags for striped bass, the reason it's relatively simple is because they're tagged at the dealer. We've got about 25 or 30 dealers that have tags, giving tags to 100,000, ever how many hundreds of thousands of recreational anglers that participate in that striped bass fishery that would just require a tremendous amount of, just a whole lot of effort. And there's still uncertainty in the, if it's voluntary reporting of tags, there's still a opportunity for a lot of unreported. So it would just be extremely difficult, I think, for this striped bass fishery to use a tagging system. And again, if we were to give each angler one tag, that would probably be over the limit. So we would potentially have to limit some sort of entry into it. And again, I just don't know if that would be possible. But I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would certainly be more difficult than I think the creel survey that we have now, which does a pretty good job. We just have an extremely small tail right now. So as the stock improves, hopefully our seasons will get longer again.
Thank you. Unless I have any other questions, I'm not seeing any hands online. I'm going to call for the roll call on this.
All right. Mr. Brewer.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Buckle.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Fulcher.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Mincy.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Powell.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Proctor.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Romano.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Siegler.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Tarpley. Thank you. Mr. Whitley.
Aye.
Thank you. Chairman Roller.
Abstain.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Okay, we are now going to move on to item 4. Was it 5? 4. Okay. And this is the slot limit. We have discussed that a little bit before. Do I have any motions on this agenda item? Mr. Fulcher.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Oh, go ahead. Absolutely.
And I think we started on this, but we never really got to it through my discard question. What would be the rationale of going lower with the minimum size under 18 with the harvest of fish to help reduce the dead discards? And I know you had the graph there and you were showing the ones that were over the 22 in a certain area and the ones that were over anticipated to be over 25 or 27. But what is the discard of those fish that are under 18 that's being caught?
So great question. Most years, the majority of the discards in the recreational sector, and this is both Moss Island and Roanoke River, are fish that are under 18 inches, 16, 17 inches. And also a lot of the discards are attributed to being over your creel limit for legal size fish. But ASMFC has a minimum now of 18 inches. And so that we can't go below 18-inch minimum size limit relative to that. So. And the 18-inch minimum size, I guess, is pretty good too, just because that's just about when they're starting to mature as well. So it kind of matches up with their maturity. So,
I mean, is that an L50 based on males or something like that, or the maturity level of? I mean, how do you base that 18?
So the maturity, I mean, we have done maturity and fecundity estimates. We've got those for the Albemarle Roanoke stock, and we have that for the Tarpam Moose stocks. They were done a little bit more recently. Kevin Knight. And, those maturity for the AR fish, that maturity is in the FMP document. I want to say by 19 and a half inches. They're 18.8. 18.8. So I wasn't too far off. So they're that 100% mature at 18.8. But again, those, as we saw in that graph, you really get your bigger bang for your buck with the eggs and of bigger fish. So thank you, Dr. Powell.
Okay. Dr. Buckle.
Yeah, I have a question for staff and DMF or WRC. If this has been discussed, in addition to given that there's the slot limit, and I agree, I want to protect the spawners that are out there, but there's this issue of discard mortality. So in addition to the slot limit, was there any discussion about having closures during the time periods when the water's warm? As you mentioned, Charlton, that those fish that are in the gill net or hook and line, and when the water's hot, they're going to have a much higher chance of dying. So was there any discussion about trying to just have a closure during a seasonal closure to deal with that discard mortality of the larger fish?
So yes, sir. The commercial and the recreational seasons all close April 30th if the towel's not reached after that. And we have no harvest throughout the entire summer. And now, of course, we can't prohibit catch and release fishing, but the season doesn't open again. Discards from other fisheries, gillnet fisheries in the summer, but the season then opens for harvest again October the 1st when the waters have cooled down some. So yes, sir, we have that closed season.
Thanks for the reminder.
Well, I mean, we did not discuss closing it even earlier, I guess, which would have been an option, but yes, sir.
Yeah, quick follow-up on that. That's a very good point. But, my experience with a lot of these fisheries is, they're going to be caught in other fisheries as well, right? So in addition to that, is it fair to say that effort decreases dramatically once the keeper seasons are closed? No, is that hard to answer? Like targeted effort.
Are you talking recreational?
Yes, yeah, recreational.
So, I mean, unfortunately, in the Albemarle Sound management area, we've not really had a krill survey. We have not had the money to continue those krill surveys all during the summer. That's something that we're actually looking at trying to do. But there is certainly some effort in the summertime. It does go down. Yes, it's absolutely a lot less. But, on the spawning grounds, though, because those fish are still concentrated, they do get a lot of effort in the catch and release in the first couple of weeks of, May. And like I said, in this FMP and our FMP update we do each year, sometimes those releases up there can be anywhere from 60 to 100,000 fish. Like I said, we don't have estimates for the ASMA, but when the fishery is really hot around Man's Harbor, I'm sure there's some catch and release going on and all over.
Yeah, same thing on the Neuse as well at times. So I will entertain a motion at any time here. Anybody would like to make one?
I need to just follow up really quick. We do have that. The krill survey does go year round in the Tarpon Neuse, so they do have estimates of that. I'm not sure what they're off the top of my head, but they're presented monthly in all of the big book and everywhere. So,
Mr. Fulcher, you have your hand up.
I have two questions. You probably won't like the first one, but apologize for that.
No, that's fine. We're not here to. We're not.
I was curious to see what the Northern and Southern did on this issue, but also the C, if I remember right, was that the division's recommendation and E, or just C was the divisions and E was the wildlife resources?
Both supported both.
You supported both?
Both the division and the Wildlife Resources Commission supported both 4C and 4E.
Okay. And I add on to that, when they supported C, did they just assume that fish over 27 went away, or did they look at C with being 18 to 25 and one fish greater than 27 to reduce discard mortality of large fish? So with the division's recommendation of item C, did any discussion occur for those fish that might potentially be harvested, and they probably would be harvested in the commercial fishery, anything over 27, so you weren't putting the fish back overboard that was dead? potentially. Even though I think that probably when that fishery is occurring, the water temperature is probably cool enough in the way that they're fishing, you don't have as much discard mortality because the water temperature is really reducing your dead discard mortality.
Yes, sir. I mean, we are aware that they are still going to catch some fish above 25 inches, and some of those discards are going to die. But you're right, it's cooler water temperature. I mean, we've used the Gillnet survey for years, the independent Gillnet survey, and we tag striped bass out of there. So when the waters are cooler, it's not like every single fish is dead. So those, although there will be some dead discards associated with fish that are released over 25 inches, benefit to the stock is going to be greater than, not than keeping any of those fish, we think. So does that answer your question?
Yes and no. So what I hear you saying is moving it to 25 inches allows a little bit larger harvest, so you don't have that discard from 22 to 27. You would have one fish, but you might potentially have 3 or 4 fish that would be 22 to 25 that were being discarded the way the regulation is now, but you're eliminating anything over 27, anything over 25.
So looking back at this figure that we looked at a minute ago, we kind of touched on the numbers based on the size limits here, where we're about 25 inches. So we are going to get dead discards of fish over that 25 inches, but based on gear sizes and meshes allowed, if we took that limit down to 22, it'd be a very large amount of discards between 22 and 25 inches.
Understand.
Mr. Fulcher, follow up? I love a motion.
So can we put I got you. Okay. Sorry. So option 4C and option 4E.
So we have a motion by Mr. Fulcher to support option 4C and E. I believe I have a second by Mr. Proctor. Is there any discussion on this motion? Go ahead, Mr. Fulcher.
Just because I'm kind of on the fence a little bit, I was
get on the record.
Waiting to see what the recommendations from Northern and Southern were that you were looking back at.
I'd be happy to, but remember, guys, the Northern and Southern doesn't have as much to go by. So I'd really appreciate it if we would keep our own thoughts in here, right, and come up with our own deliberations. I'll tell you what, I'll tell you, but this is the last time you get to listen. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. They both made the same motion you did.
I think that what we asked for is what it is.
Ask who was speaking there. Oh, Scott, let's start over then. So go ahead, Scott. Put your hand up in the future.
Yeah, so I work on the stupid internet. I apologize. If we want to hear what they got, I think that's our prerogative. Thank you.
I'm going to lightly disagree, but thank you for your thoughts. Is there any more debate on this motion before I move to a roll call? Seeing none, let's go to the vote.
All right, Mr. Brewer.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Buckle.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Fulcher.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Mincy.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Powell.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Proctor.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Romano. Sam, we can't hear you. You're still there.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Siegler.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Tarpley. Thank you, Mr. Whitley.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Roller.
Abstain.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right, well, let's move on to item 5. And I believe, okay, you have it. If you look in your documents, E is not in orange, just the word is, unless I confused anyone and got me there. So do I have any motions or commentary or debate? Could you turn your microphone on, Dr. Powell?
Sorry.
Restate that on the record, please.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept DMF's options 5A and 5E.
We have a motion on the floor. Let's wait for it to get up there. Do I have a second on the motion? Seconded by Mr. Fulcher. Do I have any debate on this motion?
Ken Ziegler.
Ken.
I was wondering if Dr. Powell would consider an amendment to his motion to roll back the season for taking striped bass on the spawning grounds and delay that by two weeks, both in the beginning and the end of the season.
Thank you, Ken. Remember I said I would prefer us to stick to the options on this debate today?
We're sticking to it. I'm just asking to amend the motion.
Well, I'm not going to allow it, but thank you, Ken.
You're not going to allow friendly amendments?
Remember I set in the ground rules since it's my meeting that I would prefer you guys to stick to the options and not edit them too much. Thank you. Mr. Powell, you ready? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I object. Offering amendments to motions is not.
I'd like to move to overrule the chair's ruling on that.
Raise your hand.
I'll second that.
For discussion of it.
I think for that to be proper, I'll have to go along with that, but I'll be willing to give you that latitude if you got some discretion.
I mean, I will give it, guys, I'm trying to keep us on schedule here. This is not to prohibit debate. If you want to debate that option instead of completely throwing it in as amendment, I'm just trying to keep us on schedule. So,
well, my understanding is when amendment is made, or a motion is made, there could be an amendment to that motion. I think that was appropriate. What I'm looking at is Robert's rules and what's appropriate. I'm not defending or I'm just making sure that we adhere to Robert's rules, that when a friendly amendment or an amendment to a motion, it should be considered. Now, if I'm wrong, please someone advise me to that. Staff, do you have any?
So we do not have a parliamentarian on staff. So Corinne, who is writing out the motions, would like some clarification on the motion to overrule. So is it to overrule the chair's ruling of out of order? Okay.
Yes. Yes, and it has to be seconded and voted on.
I wasn't sure if it was a motion.
all right. So I don't know if anybody permits. I'm trying to keep us on schedule, y'all, without going down rabbit holes. So if we want to avoid this 5-minute waste of time, we'll allow you to discuss the amendment. That wasn't my point, is to not go by Robert's Rules of Order. I just wanted to try to keep us on the schedule here and try to keep us on the issues at hand without going down into the weeds.
I second the motion.
What are we doing? Are we overruling? To be clear, I wasn't trying to put back Robert's Rules of Order. I was trying to keep it on task, right?
No, My point was.
Mr. Chairman, please call to order.
Okay, so what are we doing? You calling vote, Deb called me out of order. Is that what we're doing?
So
we're wasting too much time here,
I'm
guys.
asking that we move to overrule your ruling that would not allow, Ken Sigler to debate or discuss that motion. I'm not for or against what Ken has to suggest. I'm just saying that I feel that we should not, we should allow debate after a motion is made. That's all.
Thank you, Josh. I'll agree with you here. And if you guys would be willing to just discuss the amendment that it's cut or debate, let's just skip this if that's okay. And I'll just retract my previous statement. Okay, so Ken, would you state your original amendment to the motion?
I keep getting muted here by someone. The motion was to amend the season on the spawning grounds by 2 weeks to allow for a buffer while water temperatures are cooler for the harvest of striped bass on the spawning grounds.
So you don't have to take.
Okay, you said this was a friendly amendment. Mr. Fulcher, go ahead.
I'm just making a suggestion because I want to stay on time.
Okay.
If this was along the lines of what Mr. Powell would want to do, I think we could just do it by me agreeing to him modifying his motion, but that's up to.
That's fine. Let's go ahead. Let's do that. Would you agree to modify your motion to include this? Okay. Dr. Powell says, you say you agree on the microphone.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by all I'm saying is that the motion has been made and it has to be seconded and then it could be discussed. That's all. I'm just asking that we adhere to the appropriate rules.
You have to change your amendment. You have to change your motion. He's asking that.
His amendment stands over mine right now.
It has to be
to
use.
We're trying to be polite here. So
out of simplicity, if you agreed with Ken's view, then you could just modify your motion as long as I give you permission to do that. And then we can call that for vote without having to vote on the change. And then if it fails, go back to the original. But that's up to you. I'm whatever you want to do. Okay.
My motion is, and this is the way it stands, is the for me to accept options 5A and 5E. That's the motion. And it was seconded by Brett, and we had a discussion, and that was, he had offered a amendment. And it wasn't something that I was in favor of, I said. I just wanted to make sure that he was allowed, that's all.
I agree with you.
I mean, I don't want this thing to go get dragged into the weeds.
Thank you, Dr. Powell. I think we're in agreement there. I jumped the gun a little bit there. So you don't want to allow the amendment to be clear. Okay. So let's discuss this amendment. I have a couple hands up. I'm going to go with Mr. Sigler first and then Mr. Whitley. Ken?
It seems like water temperature is the biggest contributing factor to mortality on the catch and release fish. And my thinking is the females are showing up the 1st of May. And obviously, when the season's open to target the male fish, we're obviously going to be getting some female fish in that also. So rolling that date back by 2 weeks into the season just on the spawning grounds, while those female fish are present, then we could avoid a lot of those female fish and put a buffer in between the male fish and the female fish showing up. That's the only suggestion.
Thank you, Ken. Mr. Whitley, did you have your hand up?
I did, but I think we've taken care of what I was addressing, so we're good.
Thank you. Do I have any other comments? Looking around. Ken, did you have your hand up again? Seeing none, I say we move to our roll call vote.
All right, Mr. Brewer,
So which are we voting on? I'm sorry.
Can we please?
the motion reads, motion by Alan Powell, accept DMF options 5A and 5E.
Aye on that.
Voting aye.
Go ahead.
I'm not trying to create confusion, but
Okay.
this is getting all out of order because you had a motion by Ken, seconded by Scott. And now it's been taken down without any vote on it, even though I don't necessarily feel one way. I think they're gonna run into a problem down the road if you don't have.
No, I understand that. We got a little confused there. That was not my intentions.
So I'm trying to make it simpler.
Yeah.
Giving Mr. Powell the latitude for me to agree to change his motion, but if he doesn't change, I think you gotta handle it that way.
So what?
Brent, I agree. If I need to withdraw my second of that, if that would help with, I think the motion sort of dead. If that helps.
So we can't withdraw a second. Who made that motion that we're not voting on?
Gotcha. Understand.
Okay. Who made that motion? Did you make that motion, Scott?
I was seconded the motion.
Okay.
This is Ken Ziegler. I made the motion. I'll make the motion again without being a part of Mr. Powell's motion. I'll make it separately, so I'll withdraw my motion to amend.
Okay, you're withdrawing your motion then. Thank you. Can we go back to a roll call vote?
Yes, sir. So, Mr. Brewer, and so we're clear, the motion that we're voting on is motion by Alan Powell to accept DMF options 5A and 5E.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Buckle.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Fulcher.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Mincy.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Powell. Thank you. Mr. Proctor. Thank you. Mr. Romano.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Siegler.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Tarpley. Thank you. Mr. Whitley.
Aye.
Thank you. Chairman Roller.
Abstain.
Thank you.
I believe Ken said he had another motion he wanted to make under.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'd like to make, if the committee would support it, to recommend to the division and the commission that the harvest season on spawning grounds be delayed by 2 weeks. Put back move its opening date back and move its ending date back to allow for a buffer between the showing of the female and the male fish on the spawning grounds, and to lower mortality rates as the water be cooler.
Do I have a second for this motion? Okay, we're gonna need you to repeat your motion. Ken, can you see it on the screen?
No, I can't.
I'm gonna read it to you. Motion by Ken Ziegler, recommending the harvest on the spawning grounds be moved back 2 weeks to allow a buffer. Go ahead with the rest.
Between the arrival of the male fish and the female fish on the spawning grounds to and to improve release mortality as it relates to water temperatures.
Can you see that motion? Would you like someone to get back to you to make sure it's what you want?
It's fine. I doubt it's gonna get a second, so go ahead.
Okay, do we have a second on this motion? Seeing none, motion fails for lack of a second. Thank you, Ken, and I apologize for jumping the gun on you. That wasn't my intention. All right, we're on to the adaptive management section, item number 6. Do we have any debate or motions on this item? And you have your hand up. Mr. Mincy, see your hand up?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the adaptive management strategy promoted by Division of Marine Fisheries.
Thank you, Dr. Mincy. Do I have a second on that motion? Second by Dr. Powell. Okay, we've got the motion up. Do we have any debate on this motion? I think Mr. Whitley, you have your hand up?
Excuse me. Yes, sir. There's no limitations on this, and that's my sort of reservations on this. I'm just curious about the extent of what people can, what they can do. Any thoughts? Maybe correct me. Thank you.
Yeah. That's what I was about to say. Thank you, Corinne.
I apologize. I was having a side conversation. So for the Albemarle Roanoke, adaptive management, the biggest things that we use that for are to open and close the seasons to make sure we stay below our towel. We can change the crew limits, just as we've done recently in the Albemarle Sign management area to go from 2 fish to 1 fish. And likewise, we have gone from 2 fish to 3 fish before. Change the possession limits. We can open and close areas. Typically, we open and close areas to gillnet harvest, not recreational harvest, and that could be either to try to reduce discards, to reduce harvest, like when we have a low towel, or also to reduce interactions with protected species, whether they are in Albemarle Sound, it's typically sturgeon, but in the CSMA, it's sea turtles. And of course, a big one is to adjust the total allowable landings based on stock assessments for striped bass. A lot of our FMPs, we kind of do a stock assessment for that species, and that starts the FMP process. But for striped bass, especially the Albemarle Sound Roanoke River stock, we kind of do our stock assessments in line with ASMSC, and we do updates. We used to update the stock assessment every year. So we need that in there to adjust our towel to keep us at our fishing mortality target, which is what we base our towel on. So those are the adaptive management measures, typically what we use in the Albemarle Sound, and pretty much what they're restricted to.
Thank you for the answer.
Dr. Buckle.
Yeah, but Charlton, I was surprised that there wasn't something in here related to the recruitment, because that's right. Getting an F and being able to relate it to F target, that takes a stock assessment. So something that you guys get faster is the betaine or the JAI index of juvenile abundance. Is that something that it seems like I don't know what it's been since 2017, but if it's continued to be low, right, it's just the time's ticking. Every year that goes on, if we get another 3 years, that seems like you'd want to reduce the F, just based on low recruitment that we need to protect, right? Because that spawning stock biomass is just getting lower and lower, and we got to give it a chance to get a good year class. So just if you could speak to the use of JAI here and the management.
So we are planning on updating the benchmark stock assessment. The data went through 27. We're actually this year we're going to through data through 2021. We're going to update that stock assessment. So I mean, yes, we do have a pretty good. The JAI survey, is a pretty good indicator of juvenile abundance, but we did not really discuss actually using that as a trigger to do some sort of additional management action. I think we would, the stock assessment is going to allow that.
Yeah, thank you, Charlton. And I just wanted to add, division management made the decision to move up the assessment update of striped bass based off of low JAIs from the previous, I think, 4 years. So we're taking that into consideration and moving that up on our stock assessment schedule.
Yeah, that's great to hear that there's one that's coming up soon to deal with that. Thank you.
Ken, do you have your hand up? Do I have any more questions or comments on this motion? Seeing none, I move to we go to a roll call vote.
All right, Mr. Brewer.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Buckle.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Fulcher.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Mincy.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Powell.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Proctor.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Romano.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Siegler.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Tarpley. Thank you. Mr. Whitley.
Aye.
Thank you. Chairman Roller.
Abstain.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Good work, gentlemen. All right, we're moving on to Appendix 3, Option 1. Do I have any motions or debate on this issue? Anyone? I swear I'm going to put a clock on here and we're just going to move to the next item. Just kidding. No pressure. We're on schedule. Dr. Mincy.
I'd like to make a motion to accept suggestion 1A, then continue no possession measure suggested by Division of Marine Fisheries.
Thank you, Dr. Mincy. Do we have a second on this motion? Mr. Proctor seconds the motion. Do we have any comments on this? Any discussion? Mr. Fulcher, go ahead.
I just want to understand it better. Striped bass harvest it was pretty vague at the top of that. In what region? No.
This is the Pimlico and East Rivers, correct? CSMA. We'll move on to the next section. Mr. Fulcher, go ahead.
And presently there's no harvest commercially, but is there any recreational? There's no harvest there also.
No, there's no harvest recreationally or commercially of striped bass within the CSMA.
Any more discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'm going to move to a roll call vote.
All right, Mr. Brewer.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Buckle.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Fulcher.
Nay.
Thank you, Dr. Mincy.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Powell.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Proctor.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Romano.
Nay.
Thank you, Mr. Siegler.
Nay.
Thank you, Mr. Tarpley. Thank you, Mr. Whitley.
Nay.
Thank you, Chairman Roller.
Abstain.
I need to see the vote count. I wasn't keeping track in my head. It passes.
Motion passes 6-2, and we're going to move on to item 2. Do I have motions or discussion on this? Dr. Mincy?
I'd like to make a motion to accept option 2A to maintain the gillnet closure above the ferry lines.
We have a motion on the table. Do I have a second? Second, Mr. Proctor. Do we have any debate on this motion?
I'd like to make a substitute motion.
We're getting tricky with the Roberts rules here. Go ahead, Mr. Fulcher.
Substitute motion would be to allow use of gill nets in Neuse and Pamlico rivers.
We have a substitute motion.
Substitute need a second.
And could you make that the use of gill nets in the CSMA above the ferries?
It's the tarp Pamlico news.
When she gets it right, I'd like to add some rationale.
Okay, I'm going. Since it is Brent's, Mr. Fulcher's motion, typically we allow the motion maker to speak first. So go ahead.
Rationale for this is it was closed arbitrarily against the Secretary's advice and the standing director of marine fisheries at the time that it was closed. That year class that we were trying to protect now should have passed through, and you're hindering other fisheries for commercial harvest by not allowing it with minimal, if any, damage to the striped bass fishery.
Do we have any more debate on this issue? Dr. Powell.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out two things. First of all, as a former member of the Marine Fish Commission, I found it somewhat inappropriate for the commission to call this meeting and to vote on something that did not go before the advisory committees for the public. Secondly, I'd also like to point out that we know that using tie-down nets and distance from shore, 50 yards up in that area, at least with the tie-down nets, we've reduced bycatch by 80%, and that does not include the 50 yard from shore. So there doesn't appear to be a problem with bycatch. And again, that's my comments.
Thank you, Dr. Powell. I will add, based on some of those previous discussion points, that the observer program that is used to estimate discards is not a representative sample of the fishery. In addition, a lot of people have called into question the tie-down and setback survey for a small number of data points associated with it. So a lot of us really call into question whether that's not a good estimate of bycatch. Going ahead, Mr. Sigler, do you have any comments?
My concern is you're going to be allocated. This would essentially, from my point of view, this would be an allocation of 100% of the resource to less than 3% of the population. 97% of the population still wants fish. How are they going to get them? And if they want those fish out of the tar Pamlico, then they should have them. You're eliminating multiple fisheries. I think 24, 25 different species of fish that are caught in the area. And you're doing away with multiple fisheries to try to satisfy one for striped bass, being striped bass. And the economics of this don't work. It can't happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Do we have any more comments? Dr. Powell.
I'd like to ask for some information to the DMF staff in regards to the effectiveness of the tie downs and also the 50-yard from shore.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. 2004 is when kind of the first research was started looking at the 3-foot tie downs and the 50-yard distance from shore. And results from that initially showed there were 85 to 99% reduction in striped bass discards in the tie downs, and then around 60% reduction with the distance from shore. Additionally, Rock et al. In 2016 looked at measures prior to the implementation. In 2008, the MFC put in the tie downs and the distance from shore requirements. So they looked at data from 2004 to 2009 and compared it to data from 2011 and 12, and found there was an average of a 75% reduction in the discards from the commercial gillnet fishery. So those are the reductions that we've seen through those management measures of a 3-foot tie down and distance from shore measures.
And again, is that from the Observer program?
Yes.
Okay. So we don't have a parliamentarian here. And typically when you vote on a substitute motion, it becomes the main motion and you vote on it again. Correct? We vote on it twice.
That's correct. So if
Okay.
you approve the substitute, then it becomes the main, and then you have to vote on it as your main motion.
So going forward, do we have any more questions or comments before we move to voting on the substitute motion to make it the main motion? Mr. Fulcher.
I just think for clarity, maybe we should, because maybe some of our members can't see the board, just so everybody's on the same page, what we're discussing, if it could be read again.
Not a problem. Good point. Substitute the original motion. Well, should we read the original motion first?
That's your privilege. Just as long as everybody knows.
So the original motion was by to accept option 2A, which is maintain the gillnet fish above the ferry lines. The substitute motion by Brent Fulcher that states to allow the use of gillnets in the Tar, Pamlico, and Neuse rivers above the ferry lines. Didn't you have some discussion on whether or not you want to debate the entire CSMA?
Korean overrode.
Okay, fine. I just want to make sure we're good on the language there. Okay.
But you could override them if you like.
No, I'm fine. I'm going to defer to staff on that one. I just want to make sure we're clear on the language. I didn't get that whole debate there. So this motion is seconded. So let's vote on the substitute motion. Dr. Buckle, go ahead.
Just, the reductions from the tie down and the 50 feet from shore, is that the use of gillnets with those requirements? Is that what we're talking about here, or?
So there is no gillnets above the ferry lines. And I'm believing that this motion, if I'm correct, is to recommend that the commission allow the use of gillnets above the ferry lines.
That would be correct, and my assumption would be that the division would manage that fishery just like they had prior to that, with all the restrictions that are in place for tie downs, setbacks, times, because it is managed presently. But I think what you have hindered in this fishery is mostly a runaround drop net fishery that targeted spots in the summertime, mullets for bait and for roe mullet in the fall, and bluefish and Spanish mackerel. That's what you've hindered out of the fishery. In the most part, if you looked at the CPUE on the amounts of trips that were taken in Upper Neuse River, I think you would find that's mostly what the effort was.
Fair point. I do have two hands up here. I think I neglected to look at the screen. Mr. Sigler, would you like to comment? Or Mr. Whitley, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Who you calling on?
Mr. Whitley, Scott, Mr. Sigler.
Just remind me, what is the mesh size?
Did you say what is the mesh size?
Mesh. MESH.
Oh, gotcha. I'm looking at staff here. But this is the difficulty of hybrid missions, hybrid meetings.
The mesh size for what? Like,
yeah, that's what I'm trying to get clarification on. I'm not sure I understand the question, Scott.
Well, we're talking about that time of years. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, as it states now, there is no gill netting in the upper above the ferry lines in the CSMA. So I'm assuming that this motion, as stated by Mr. Fulcher, would go to the previous management where we allowed gill netting above the ferry lines. I see Mr. Sigler has his hand up. Staff from say, can I move fast?
You just restated what I was going to state.
Okay.
Return to the original regulations prior to 2019.
That's what I'm wanting to know. Yes, sir.
Mr. Felter, do you want to, I mean, that may be helpful. Did you hear that comment? I think it was brought up as, previous management.
I was asking Steve that maybe him or Kat should comment on this because it seems to be some confusion of what fisheries and what size webbing or mesh size would be utilized in fisheries and also time of year. There's already restrictions on certain sizes at certain times and certain days. They can answer those questions better than any of us.
Yeah, I'll ask staff to just briefly describe what the management measures for nets were above the ferry lines prior to 2019 and maybe what we looked at in the amendment.
Yeah, so, above the ferry lines, there were small mesh nets allowed, there were large mesh nets allowed, up to 6.5 inch mesh nets. So, those would go back in place. And then the management was, allowing a striped bass fishery there. And once the striped bass fishery closes, then, the 3-foot tie downs and 50-yard distance from shore management measures went in place up there. We also have attendance requirements for small mesh nets within 200 yards. So there were, quite a few management measures up there.
And also now with the flounder closed, you have your large meshes. Now with your flounder closures, you have your large mesh that's closed predominantly most of the year, I think, isn't it?
I believe so. Yeah, it's about a 2-week season now.
Mr. Whitley, you have your hand up?
Yes, sir, I did. Thank you. Thank you.
Do you have a comment? So do we want to vote on this motion as it reads? Is everybody happy with that? Let's go ahead with the roll call vote.
You would like me to read the motion? Is that
it? Absolutely.
All right. So the motion on the board is a substitute motion by Brent Fulcher to allow the use of gill nets in the Tar Pamlico and Noose rivers above the ferry lines. So Mr. Brewer. Mr. Brewer.
Nay.
Thank you. Dr. Buckle.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Fulcher.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Mincy.
Nay.
Thank you. Dr. Powell.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Proctor.
Nay.
Thank you. Mr. Romano.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Siegler.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Tarpley. Thank you. Mr. Whitley. Thank you. Chairman Roller.
No.
What does the vote count, Corinne? Vote, motion fails.
Motion fails. Now we go back to the original motion. And the original motion was by Mency to accept option 2A to maintain the gill enclosure above the ferry lines. Is there anybody who would like to make a comment on this motion? Mr. Whitley, do you have your hand up?
Do I have my, I'm sorry, I'll take it down. I apologize.
Thank you. That makes it easier on me. I appreciate it. Seeing no comments, let's go ahead with the roll call vote. This motion.
All right, Mr. Brewer.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Buckle.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Fulcher.
Nay.
Thank you. Dr. Mincy.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Powell.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Proctor.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Romano.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Siegler.
Nay.
Thank you. Mr. Tarpley. Thank you. Mr. Whitley.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Roller.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion fails.
Fails.
551. Let's move on to item 3, adaptive management. Perhaps it would be helpful to get staff a little clarification on this. This one. Does everybody agree to that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to explain what the adaptive management is for this particular one. What we want to do is we want to be able to review the data 2024 and 2025, determine if populations are self-sustaining and if a sustainable harvest can be determined. So we're going to review the data midway in the next 5-year FMP.
Okay, what sort of data you're reviewing to look at it?
Fishery independent data, so our juvenile abundance survey, the independent gill net survey, and then the spawning grounds with WRC.
Okay, thank you. Do I have any motions or any comments on this? Not seeing. I have a motion to approve option 3 by Mr. Proctor. Do I have a second for that motion? Second by Dr. Buckle. Do we have any debate on this motion? Seeing no debate, I call for the roll call vote.
All right. Mr. Brewer.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Buckle.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Fulcher. Thank you. Dr. Mincy.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Powell.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Proctor.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Ramona.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Siegler.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Tarpley. Thank you. Mr. Whitley.
Yes.
Thank you. Chairman Roller.
Abstain.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you all. Time to move on to Appendix 4, the Cape Fear River Sustainable Harvest. So are we going to put this whole one up as different options, or how do we approach this? Do we need to do 5 different motions, or do you need to do it as one motion? One motion, possibly. Okay. Well, with advice by staff, I will just open the floor to see if anybody wants to make any motions. I'll accept partial motions or full motions.
Ken Ziegler, I'll make a motion to accept option 1
Motion by Ken Sigler to accept option one, which is the maintain the no possession provision. Correct.
David Menzie, I'll second.
Seconded by David Menzie. Can we have everyone turn off their mic when they're not speaking? We're getting some really bad feedback. Mr. Felcher, go ahead.
A quick question. The option two, which was in green, where did that recommendation come from?
Charlton, you can go ahead and answer that. I don't know if Joe can.
Yeah, I don't know if Joe's Owen can hear us or not, but that was the Wildlife Resources recommendation, and they are on the they're online if you want to get a rationale from them for that. But that was the Wildlife Commission's recommendation.
We have the motions back on the screen.
We're having trouble hearing you, Mr. Whitley. Oh. Did you want the PowerPoint back up?
Yes, please.
Okay. In the green, just to be clear, was the WRC recommendation, and correct, you guys did not, DMF and WRC just didn't agree on which way to go forward, right?
Like to ask for just information.
Go ahead, Dr. Powell.
Those two, between WRC and DMF.
Joe, are you in Wilmington?
I am. I couldn't hear his question because his mic was muted. If you could repeat it for me.
So Mr. Powell was asking what the differences were between the DMF and the WRC rationale for the. Yep.
So the WRC rationale is they would like to see harvest allowed in the Cape Fear to provide opportunities for harvest of that stock that is primarily hatchery supported. And they believe that access to the spawning grounds with these recent changes is unlikely. The DMF position, we would like to keep the no harvest no possession provision in place to let us evaluate these recent changes that happened to the passage structure at Lock and Dam 1, as well as the new pulse flows that they're implementing. There's actually a pulse flow being implemented right now, and that's designed to submerge the locks and dams so the fish can pass them without even needing to use a passage structure. Additionally, we'd like to further look into the reproduction we're seeing in the system, so it's not 100% hatchery fish. You know, when we're looking at the genetic work, there is some wild reproduction going on. I think it's, around 10% of all the fish tested in the 2019 year were not hatchery. And we do see those young of the year. And we don't think that DMF thinks that, allowing harvest during the spawning season will target those fish that do manage to successfully pass and spawn. So just giving us a little more time to be able to assess these changes that are new as of kind of 2021, even though it's been a moratorium, since 2008, there's just recent changes that just happened.
Thank you very much for that clarity. Appreciate it.
No problem.
I would point out that we had some good questions and debate about this during the initial presentation. So, do we have any more questions? I don't see any hands up online. Anybody in the room? Seeing none, can we go ahead with the roll call vote?
Hold on one second.
I've got one question, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Sigler.
If I'm not correct, you said there was no movement between the Cape Fear fish and the Tarpamico fish. interchanging there?
Joe, did you hear that? But I can go ahead and answer it. There is based on the tagging data that we have done, there is very rarely do we see Cape Fear fish up in the noose or the tarpam. I mean, we have seen a few. We've actually had one that we tagged that was caught up in Chesapeake Bay. I mean, of the thousands, yes, the majority of them stay in that low up in that Cape Fear area and don't move out up to the Pamlico Sound noose tarpam.
So back to the roll call vote.
All right. Mr. Brewer.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Buckle.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Fulcher.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Mincy.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Powell.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Proctor.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Romano.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Siegler.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Tarpley. Thank you. Mr. Whitley. Mr. Whitley.
Sorry, nay.
Thank you. That was a nay. Thank you. Chairman Roller.
Abstain.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Moving on, we have not discussed adaptive management in Appendix 4. I want to know if there's any discussion or motion on option 5. Can you have your hand up, or was that left up from before?
That's leftover, sorry.
Thank you, Ken. Now put it back down. Thank you.
I make a motion that we adopt 5, adaptive management.
All A, B, and C? So all of option 5? There's 3 options.
Yes, A, B, and C, I'm sorry.
Just looking for clarification. Do we have a second by Mr. Proctor? Thank you.
Can we list the options so I can see them, please?
In the decision document on page 9.
So for clarification, the bullets under adaptive management aren't necessarily intended as adaptive management options as much as they are a description of the adaptive management on this area. So it's option 5.
Okay, so just all of option 5.
I got it in front of me.
Okay.
I have it in front of me. We're good. We're good.
That was a little confusing. So.
I apologize. I got it.
No worries. It was a good question. Yeah, Mr. Proctor. Okay, is there any debate or questions on this motion? I'm not seeing any hands online or in the room. I'll go ahead and go for a roll call vote. Unless Ken wants to jump in at the last second again. Just kidding.
Is there something, staff? Is there?
We should go now.
Okay, let's go ahead with the vote.
All right. Mr. Brewer.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Buckle.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Fulcher.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Mincy.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Powell.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Proctor.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Romano.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Siegler.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Tarpley.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Whitley.
Aye.
Thank you. Chairman Roller.
Abstain.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. A little bit behind schedule, but we're doing pretty good. Now we're going to move on to Appendix 5, the hook and line as a commercial gear. So maybe clarification by staff. A little confusion on this one, what we're doing. So we have option, you've got 2 tied in options that are recommendations, option 1 and option 3, correct? Okay. Do we have any comments or motions? Mr. Proctor?
Except on option 1 and option 3.
Motion by Mr. Proctor to accept option 1 and 3. Do I have a second for that motion?
Second, Menzie.
Thank you, Mr. Mincy, Dr. Mincy. The motion has been seconded. So let staff get that up. Do we have any questions or debate on this item? It's a good one to debate, y'all. Oh, Mr. Powell, go ahead.
No, we're hurting for time here, but
we're good.
Could DMF just give a real quick rundown on their why they put forward management option 1?
Joe, I don't know if you want to do this or I can.
Sure, I'll and then you can fill in any gaps where if I miss anything. The division right now recommends not allowing hook and line as a commercial gear at this time because of the low, the overfishing stock status and the low towel in the only management area open. We just don't want to encourage any additional effort on this stock at this time. But we do want to keep it as an option through adaptive management if it comes down to it and it's needed as a gear in the future, to have it as an option and have that adaptive management framework available to kind of inform how to use it as a commercial gear.
On that note, maybe I could get a further clarification from staff on this. So, is this a quota monitored fishery? How often are you reporting landings on this fishery?
Well, so this option would be for statewide, first off, right? It would be if commercial harvest is opened in the Tarpam News or wherever, it would be statewide. So what was your question one more time now?
So your recommendation is you don't want any more effort on this fishery, which I assume would be in the ASMA because it's the only one option, correct? So what is so you don't want any more effort, but this is a quota monitor. I mean, how do you monitor this fishery? Is it normal trip tickets? Are you a couple weeks behind?
So sorry, I got you. Yeah. So this striped bass, because they have those commercial landing tags, the dealers have to call in the next day their landings from the previous day. So it's daily quota monitoring. So, but the thing is, if you have a limit of 10 fish a day, and you have 100 or 120 participants in the fishery, and it closes like it did just recently in, less than 2 weeks, 10, 11, 12 days. If you offer another gear like hook and line, which a lot of people have, and you have another 200 participants in the fishery, well, then the fishery may last 1 day. So it was such a low towel right now. We really don't think it would be a good idea now. And of course, this issue came up in Amendment 1 in the previous FMP.
Okay, thank you. That was exactly what I was looking for. It was a great explanation. Dr. Powell, do you have a hand up?
Renaming all of you.
Do we have any more comments or questions on this? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Rowland. I just wanted to add just a little bit of additional rationale from the division on why we recommend not allowing a hook and line fishery at this time. The striped bass plan AC debated this, and they recommended that it not be implemented at this time based on a lack of interest in the fishery. So that did factor into the decision's deliberations on recommending not allowing hook and line at this time.
Thank you. And I just think that's all very helpful for the advisory committee to hear. So, do you have any more debate? We can go ahead and go to a roll call vote. I'm not seeing any hands. So let's go ahead and do the vote.
All right. Mr. Brewer.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Buckle.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Fulcher.
Abstain.
Thank you. Dr. Mincy.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Powell. Thank you. Mr. Proctor.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Romano.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Siegler.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Tarpley. Thank you. Mr. Whitley.
Yes.
Thank you. Chairman Roller.
Abstain.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Can we get a vote count on that? There was a lot of.
Yeah. Sorry, our dial-up's slow. Motion passes 6-0 with 5 abstentions.
Fantastic.
Yes.
All right. Well, that concludes the Estuarine Striped Bass Fisheries Management Plan 2 decision document. I can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Marine Fisheries Commission update. And I assume you'll be doing that, Steve?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Roller, and I'll try to keep this brief so we can get out of here. So at their February meeting, the Marine Fisheries Commission approved Draft Amendment 2 to the Estuarine Striped Bass FMP without gill net restrictions, options 2B and 2C in the Tarpam and Noose Rivers Sustainable Harvest Paper. In addition to the AC reviews this week, the public comment period is also open for this plan and is open through the end of the month. I do want to remind everyone that the division held a listening session last week on March 9th. The listening sessions are recorded and are posted on the division website for the public, so anyone can go back and listen to that listening session. The commission also selected their preferred management options for Amendment 3 to the Southern Flounder FMP. Those management options are now being reviewed by the DEQ Secretary and legislative committees. Regarding the allocation issue, the commission approved delaying the stepwise process to reach 50-50 parity by 2 years. So the first year of the stepwise process was shifted from 2021 to 2023, with parity being reached in 2026. And finally, the commission approved a resolution saying that the MFC recognizes that there may need to be consideration of a moratorium if there are continued excesses in the allowable catch of flounder from both sectors. Also, in February, the Commission gave final approval for Amendment 2 of the Shrimp Fishery Management Plan, and the division is now moving forward with implementation of that plan. Now, moving to the upcoming May business meeting, the Commission will be presented with the North Carolina Fishery Management Plan for interjurisdictional fisheries and the outcome of the striped mullet stock assessment, which the division is currently working on finalization. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Do you have any questions for Steve? Seeing none, do we have any planned agenda items for the next meeting?
So right now there is no planned agenda items, and I think the next meeting is not scheduled until October.
Wonderful. And so with that, I will adjourn this meeting of the Finfish Committee. Good job, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, folks. Sorry I couldn't be there.